That's right. We are here and we hope we pass our audition. It is the Beatles Get Back Part 3, days 17 to 22. It's all about the Rooftop concert. I'm your host, Jeff Mader, joined as always by my brother, Dave Mader. Dave.
Except when I don't. I like how you say, as always, by Dave Mader, except when I don't join you guys. But yes, hi, hello, here I am.
It is Super Mader Bros podcasting, so I always say as always. But we do have another group of bros, the Shields Bros. Maybe they'll have Super Shields Bros podcasting one day. This is Josh Shields. Hey, Josh, how are you?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you?
Good. Jake, we'll bring you in as well. Jake, are you ready to talk about this Rooftop concert? You watched this all in one shot. I don't know how you did it.
Yeah, I'm ready. It's a lot of info, but I watched it pretty concisely.
Okay. All right. Well, let's just jump right into it for all you Beatles fans out there. This is the lead up to the actual Rooftop performance. And we kind of, start off here on day 17, and Ringo is playing Octopus's Garden, guys. Dave, did you enjoy the Octopus's Garden of it all and George helping him out before, the big boys showed up?
Yeah, and this is where this is my first note that I made here, because I was like, what is going on with this album? Because like so many of these songs end up on Abbey Road, right? But Octopus's Garden's not part of the Let It Be album, right?
No.
But it seems like they're like, man, if only we could have written 14 songs. If only we could have figured out 14 songs, then maybe we could have had this album, and all these great grand ideas that they had could have come to fruition. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? You easily had an album here that you could have made. Like this, what I liked about the Octopus's Garden, which is a song I've always enjoyed. I think it's the best song Ringo sings, and I always knew that George helped him write it, but you really see how much George helps him write this song.
He literally just had the first part, and he even says in this episode, "Oh, that's all I've got." So then George was like, "Okay, let's run."
He's like, "I like to be under the sea, an octopus's garden in the shade," and it's like that's my song. And then George is like, "Well, you'll need more."
Yeah, we need to work through this. Josh, did you enjoy the George helping him out here? Did you kind of see what Dave's saying, that they had this album, but maybe if they had given a little bit more attention to George and Ringo's songs, maybe they could have, busted that out? Or do you think that wasn't the dynamic of the group at that time?
Yeah, I mean, again, we kind of talked about it a lot last week about the dynamic and the songwriting. I thought it was kind of interesting kind of early on in the episode where they're talking and they're like, it'd be really nice if we had, 6 more weeks and we could get like a bunch of these songs finalized and have a really good album. And that's essentially what they did to make Abbey Road. Is they came back, I think, a few months later, and they basically wrote an album using a lot of these same songs. It was also funny at one point when they were talking about we only have 6 or 7 songs. And then they actually listed out all the ones that were pretty much finalized, and they had like 14 or something like that. So, in these 3 episodes, we probably saw the beginnings of at least, 25 Beatles songs, which is pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And Jake, I think it's important to distinguish between the Let It Be and Abbey Road albums. Like, so the Let It Be here is basically, this whole episode takes place at Savile Row, but Abbey Road is recorded at Abbey Road, and so it's completely different. Do you think like this is like the hangout, like clubhouse feel here that we're getting with the Let It Be stuff, and Abbey Road is when they went to work? It was a little bit more businessman like with George Martin.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also a lot of like what they were trying to do for the live performance, a lot of the songs on Let It Be are songs that can be performed live, which is not the case for a lot of the songs in Abbey Road.
Right.
So you're seeing like a lot of the songs that they've been working on a lot in this album, like, Mean Mr. Mustard and Maxwell Silver Hammer, those are all those songs to come. Whereas these are a lot more of the songs that they practiced and they recorded with the idea of them doing them live. So I think that's kind of where the distinction came from.
Yeah, I think like to answer like kind of what you're saying, Dave, earlier is like, oh, well, how didn't they have 14 songs? Well, Jake just kind of alluded to, they only had like 6 or 7 that they could actually do live.
You can't do Octopus's Garden live?
Well, they didn't have that written yet, but like the other songs that like, we're talking about here are like, Long and Winding Road, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pan, Let It Be. A lot of these songs are, because they wanted to do overdubs with strings and and brass stuff. So they didn't really want to like mess with those songs and expose them to an audience yet. So they're kind of holding those songs tight to their vest, and they kind of talk about that in this episode.
Right. Like, because they keep it like when they're like, well, we're going to play like 6 songs on this rooftop concert by the end of this episode. Right. And really I think they play 4 or 5, maybe tops, but they basically play Get Back. They play
I've Got a Feeling.
I've Got a Feeling and Don't Let Me Down. They played those each twice.
Yep.
Right?
They played Dig a Pony and they played One After 9.
And One After 9 or 909.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like so after watching all of these 3 episodes, I'm like, man, they play like those 3 songs or 4 songs a lot because they're practicing them, right? And so by the time they do it on the roof, like they're well practiced, they know what they're doing. But it was like they're like, oh, we want to make these 3 songs really, really good, and then like this whole dream of having this 14 live song big show in front of Arabs or whatever they were going to do,
Right.
that they had cooked up, never came to fruition, and we get like sort of this other thing which we also find out in this episode nearly happened because they're humming and they're hawing throughout the whole thing. Are we going to go on the roof? Are we not going to go on the roof? Are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? And if not this, then what?
It seemed like, okay, we'll get to that conversation later, Dave, but it seemed like to me that the only one poo-pooing the idea of going on the roof was George, and he's like, I'll do it if you guys want to do it. They're like, yeah, we kind of want to do it, but we'll get to that later. There's a lot leading up to that that's, I think, pretty important of like how they are kind of operating here at Savile Row. Like you mentioned, the Heather McCartney of it all is coming into the room and they're just kind of still messing around, just kind of having fun. Like that's kind of the whole beginning part of this episode. Josh, like, do you think like, is that kind of procrastination? Is that just the life of a musician and of a band? Like it seems like Paul is the guy that wants to get things done, get things right, but he knows he can't push these guys too hard or too far before, he's walking a line. I kind of got that impression anyway.
Yeah, I mean, they worked over the weekend, right? So, and I can't remember. I watched that first half a couple days ago, but I think that episode where Heather was there was maybe the Sunday, like it was like a weekend day. So they weren't working as hard. They were just kind of playing around with the songs. That whole initial sequence, I thought was really cool. How they kind of edited it to show them having fun, like it was a nice little break almost. And I think this episode, just from a narrative perspective and from a thematic perspective, was easily the strongest of the 3. It kind of showed that, they loosened up, they fooled around, then they got down to business. They, got some of these songs finalized, and then they actually followed through with the concert. Like, even knowing what was going to happen, they somehow, Peter Jackson made there be drama. Like, oh, maybe they won't go on the roof. Maybe that never actually happened, and I'm just delusional. It's like the Berenstain Bears. You know what I mean? Like, I really liked this episode.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Like, Jake, what did you kind of make of like how Peter Jackson edited this compared to like the Let It Be movie, which is very somber? I feel like, yeah, Josh is making a good point about suspense and how he kind of builds this. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think so too. I think he kind of wanted the payoff for when they actually do the concert. That's kind of like, all right, they're actually doing it, like they're playing, and it was a very positive kind of ending to the whole documentary where it's everything kind of coming together. It seems like for the most part, everyone on the street liked it. The band seemed to love playing. They all kind of had smiles on their faces. So it was kind of the whole climax of the whole documentary.
Yeah, I think he really wants to show how the Beatles are nervous. Like they're kind of like,
yeah,
are they? They're not sure of it, and they don't want to do anything. It seems like unless they know it's going to be good.
Yeah, it was almost like they were nervous and unsure up to the point where they started playing, and then once they started playing, like, all right, we got this. We love doing this, and they seem to really embrace the whole situation.
Yeah, because it is a bit of like a out of the box idea to just go up to the roof unannounced and start blaring music throughout London at like, I think this is at like 4
No, it's like 12:30. It's like the middle of the day.
Is it the middle of the day? Okay, because they said it was like
lunchtime.
Was it lunchtime? Okay, I didn't look that up, but it's very overcast, and it's London in January. It's not a surprise, but it looks like it's the end of the day, but
it's not. Yeah, it's just like it's not. There's not any kind of Yeah, there's just it's cold up there too. Like it's windy and like they can barely feel their hands by the end. And like Ringo's wearing his wife's raincoat or whatever, and so is John's wearing Yoko's fur coat or whatever.
Yeah, they're all wearing, I think, their wives' jackets and stuff. Go ahead.
Wikipedia says it started at 12:30 p.m. So it was lunchtime.
Lunchtime. Okay, cool. Yeah, no, it's definitely I guess that would probably be like the warmest time they could go up then. It's not like, the sun's going down, it's getting colder and colder by the minute. So it actually probably would have been the best time for them to go up there as far as heat. But yeah, it was it was definitely a dreary looking day, but they brought some life to it. Yeah, so when it comes to the actual like lead up to the performance, I think it's quite interesting for me to kind of notice how like Paul is like Dave, like he seems like this workaholic person.
Yes.
And the other three Beatles are kind of like I feel like John is the second workaholic. Like he's a workaholic, but on his time, like he kind of likes to, go with Paul here. But the other two, I think, kind of like want to just, write their own stuff and kind of come in and then play with the band, but not take it super, super uber duper seriously, like Paul does. I don't know. Do you kind of see that, he's kind of pushing them a little hard a little bit.
Yeah, like the whole thing about like John Lennon was the one I really figured out more about in this documentary. Like, what is there to John Lennon? Who is he? Because I constantly feel like he's two people.
Yeah.
He has this version of him that works with Paul, and is just like kind of a devout musician, and is just kind of like dedicated to the craft. And then on the other hand, when he's this other John that's kind of more in with George, who hates Paul and doesn't like anything and is kind of just miserable and kind of, I don't know, like
it's kind of a cynical,
cynic, and doesn't really want to be there and just kind of wants to be contrarian all the time. Not just with George, but just like that's kind of like when George is kind of like negative energy and Paul is kind of positive energy.
Yeah.
In John's case, and so even though Paul is this workaholic driven kind of guy, John, I feel like, is trying to be everything to everybody, in this band. He's trying to, I guess, in his way, trying to be the leader, but
he's kind of but he's more like a glue guy in a way.
He's the rhythm guitar, he's kind of bringing it together. But I don't know, like I read some other quote today from George Harrison. He's like, John is one of the sweetest, nicest guys in the world, but on the other hand, he's a fucking bastard, and he always was.
Yeah.
And that's like kind of like the contradiction to John Lennon. So you see like these two people coming through when it's only something you can like get from observing somebody for like this many hours, like where they let their guards down and they kind of like drop things. Like Paul McCartney is exactly who I thought he was by the end of this. Like nothing of my opinion changed on him. John Lennon, I got more of a sense of like, yeah, he was a really talented musician, moody, issues. George Harrison, this guy, like, come on, just again, like moody, difficult, wants to do his own thing, doesn't really belong in this band anymore, and he's outgrown it. Like George is at the point in his life, and they all like it's not a huge shocker they broke up a year after this or whatever it was, right?
Yeah, like I think you're right about the George. My opinion on George actually kind of really changed throughout the documentary, where like I felt sorry for him, but I understood where he was coming from, and then other times I was like, well, why don't you just like be a team player and just like kind of really, like be more enthusiastic. Like, did you feel that way at all, Josh? Like about George?
Yeah, I mean, George is, again, I think I said this on the first episode, I never knew a lot about him. I've always been sort of a Paul guy, and I like John. Like John has some good songs, and Ringo was on Shining Time Station, so I love that dude. But yeah, I think this episode kind of showed that George had checked out. He literally says in this episode I think it was to John, where he's like, yeah, like I kind of want to do my own album so I can, play all my own songs. He doesn't say, why don't we do an album where we play my songs? He's like, no, I want to do my own thing, and then, be able to come back and do a Beatles album after. So if it doesn't make money, I won't be poor, basically. And it's not that that's a bad thing. I'm sure they're all thinking about potential solo careers, but the way he says it makes me think, he's like, I want to do my own thing and see, like, if I'm even better than the Beatles. Like, it comes off like he's a little whiny by the end of this.
And who chirps up right when that was said, Josh? Yoko Ono. She's like, you should. Yeah, great idea.
The evidence mounts.
The evidence mounts. Jake, kind of like, what did you take from like the whole George of it all that we're kind of discussing here? Did you kind of like where do you lean? Like, you feel sorry for him? He's in the shadow, or he's kind of not a team player?
I can see where he's coming from. Like, I don't agree with some of the way that he went about it, but I agree that he had a lot of really good songs that they never did, or that he knew that if, he stayed just only with the Beatles, that maybe would never get released or never get made. So I can kind of see his point of view, but yeah, he was still kind of a little whiny bitch some of the times.
Sometimes.
Some of the times, like, it came down to, like, I can understand, like, it's basically like, and Paul says it in this episode where he's like, I don't want to be the producer of the Beatles, but I kind of have to be, and I can see where he's coming from, because on, like, what Dave said before too, like, on one hand, he's got George, who kind of was like, don't really like having to listen to you guys all the time, tell me what to do. And then on John is like, kind of, he's up, he's down, he's with Paul, he's like, yeah, with George, he's, which was apparently happening all the time in the Beatles in general, where basically, oh, you're my best friend, and then, oh, you're my best friend, and it was, they would go in circles like that, and it would get very gossipy and get, so I think that also had a lot to do with their dynamic as a band. But so that's why they didn't do anything for like 2 years. That's why, like, when they stopped touring, it was just pure studio work, and they could kind of get away from each other. Or on this day, all right, I just have to work with this guy, So I could see how that came across. But this whole point of this whole Get Back sessions was to be like, okay, we're a band again. And I get this feeling a lot of the time that, like, they don't want to be a band, And
yes,
so, Dave.
Like, well, Ringo wants to be a band,
right? Paul wants to be a band, but kind of where Paul gets his songs on most of the time.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't see like this, like, Paul being greedy, jealous, like, which is kind of his reputation here. I think that was equally Paul and John being sort of dismissive of some of George's really good songwriting ideas, and things like that, and the fact that they just had their heads up their own asses a little bit too much, all of them. Like, we're the Beatles, we're the greatest friggin' thing there ever was, right? Like, but they're insecure. They're clearly insecure as they compare themselves to bands like the Rolling Stones and the other contemporary acts, that they don't have it anymore. That could we get up on stage and perform? Maybe George has the biggest thing. Like, he doesn't feel good about that. I feel George is like, I do my best work in the studio, not on a stage. So why would I want to, be a live performer? That's not really.
Isn't that kind of the most interesting thing? Like, I kind of took from this episode, and Josh or Jake, you can chime in on this one. Like, the fact that the way they talk about albums, they're like, oh, another album, and they keep saying this over and over. Like Paul kind of alludes to, like, it needs to be more visual, and we need to get to a place where people see us, and that's where the money is, and that's where the interactive, kind of like where we are today with social media and everything that's going on. Paul was like way ahead of the game. That's what he wanted to do. Whereas the other guys were like, nah, we're good just making the music. And, so Josh, Jake, we'll go with you, Josh, first. Do you kind of see, like, I feel like Paul's way ahead of his time, but at the same time, I can kind of see, as a rock and roll band in 1969 and how famous they were, to want to be a little bit more sheltered.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe Paul was trying to, like, bring a spark back to the band. He, like he said, he wants it to lead up to something. He doesn't just want them all coming into the studio arguing, recording some songs and leaving. What you were saying earlier when I was watching this and they were talking about that, it kind of reminded me of George R.R. Martin. He doesn't want to just write more books. He wants to, like, make TV shows and write other books and, do, like, stuff like that. Who wants to write another Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire book? Like, that's what I think the Beatles are like at this point. They're kind of, yeah, we've made tons of money doing this and we're, like, the best in the world at it, but that's boring. We want to do something different. I think that's how Paul feels, is, I want to get to another level, even though he's already, if they just kept making albums for another 20 years, they probably would have made hundreds of more hits, right? You know, and John would still be alive. Who knows?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, they probably would have grown apart at some point, but I think everybody kind of goes, why not one more? Why did they break up at this point when they were basically at the height of their powers? You know, Jake, do you think like, you know, that this was the time? I've heard like a Ringo interview where he kind of discussed the fact that like, you know, we're all kind of just drifting apart. And he's like, I would have went on, but you know, the whole idea of the band leave them wanting more. Do you think that was kind of what makes the Beatles so special in some ways?
Yeah, and I think going back to like the whole Paul wanting more than just making albums was, you know, he saw that what they've been doing recently has been kind of pulling them apart, whereas they were at their best and at their happiest when they were touring, they were making films, they were doing all sorts of different stuff. So I think, I don't know if consciously or subconsciously he was thinking, all right, we got to do something different here to, I don't know, get back to where we used to be, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of how.
Sorry,
go ahead.
but like just like where they were at this time in their life. And we talked about this when we talked about part one, but the fact that, you know, like the fact that Heather and Linda McCartney are here and that their families are constantly coming in. What's the advantages of doing an album? You know, like if you're George and you're maybe got some stage fright, there's that. But it's also like I can go in, I can record, we can work all day. It's almost like a 9-to-5 job. You know, it's almost like having a real regular job. I'm just a musician. I go in, I make songs, and then I go home. I have dinner with my family. You know, and like versus the days when they were on the road, going from city to city, concert to concert. I'm sure that was really exciting and invigorating. And, you know, they had the groupies and all the women screaming after them. But, you know, I think that's probably part, especially maybe in maybe George's case in particular, what he's not eager or excited to get back to at all, you know?
Right. Yeah, he wants to go live out in like the country and just like he will eventually after this go make his own recording studio in like a castle like estate in the middle, like outside of London, and like that's just where he hung out. Like that's where George went. You know, Paul stayed in London, but also went to Scotland a lot and was in Scotland and did all of his Ram stuff. And right after this, and then John ends up going to New York. You know, Ringo, I'm not sure. I think he stayed in London too, but you know, so they all kind of, you know, did that, you know.
But like Paul McCartney after this went on to do Wings, and like he became like he still performs to this day. He still performs live. But did George Harrison really perform live much into his solo career?
Not until like the Traveling Wilburys, where and it was very little.
That's like 20 years after this.
Yeah. So like no, he didn't. No, he you're right. I do think he was over it. He was over the Beatlemania. He was tired of it. And I think he kind of convinced John to be over it too. You know, I think that was a part of why John left England, you know, like why he went to New York. Because, you know, I think a big part of Beatlemania was the British music machine that pumped out all those bands. You know, and it would continue at this point to pump out like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and all that stuff still coming out of England at this time. And so like, Josh, do you kind of see, like, do you agree with that George was over it? And that was a big part of the breakup of the Beatles here too. It wasn't, you know, we talked about the Allen Klein of it all and we'll get to that, but
yeah, like I think we talked about it a lot last time. I think George kind of felt like he had outgrown the Beatles. You know, they had him in a role. He's like, you know, I'll make a hockey analogy, I guess, because I'm wearing a Leafs hoodie, but like he's like, you know, the second line center on the Beatles, and he wants to go maybe to a team where he can be the star. And I think he's not on the Beatles. You know, arguably he's the fourth fiddle. He's the quiet Beatle. Like, you know, Ringo for some reason was more popular, probably because he's a little more charismatic. Usually the drummer's the background guy, but yeah.
What if they were a curling team, Josh? Who would be what position?
That's exactly what I said last episode, Dave, that Ringo's the lead, George is the second, and then I think it goes back and forth between who's the skip and who's the vice between John and Paul.
I think in this album, it's Paul as the skip.
Yeah, he's been the skip since Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he
whether he wants to be or not, you know?
Yeah. Like, before it was John. John was the skip, probably everything pre Sgt. Pepper. You know, but from Sgt. Pepper on, it's pretty clear that Paul's running the show.
And George isn't content to be the second anymore.
In this episode, like in this album, I feel like George was throwing the lead rocks and then saying he was injured so he couldn't sweep. So he was just sitting down and watching everyone else play. Like he put in no effort. So
yeah, and I guess Billy Preston was their fifth, but he would sub in for George. You know?
Yeah, exactly. and I just looked this up, like, because it kind of came to my mind when I was watching this, and then I kind of looked it up quickly before this. I believe Jake might know this, or Jeff, that George specifically didn't want any of his songs played on the rooftop.
Yes, that's right, because a lot of his songs are slow, and a lot of his songs have this, you know, they're hard to do with a rock group. To be honest, like, you know, that's the thing with George's songs. I think that's a part of why John and Paul kind of, like, you know, especially John, because we kind of got that in the first episode, why you know, George's songs got kicked to the curb a lot. And, you know, we look back at them, like Jake, we look back at those songs that are on All Things Must Pass as all these great songs, and they are. I love All Things Must Pass, but at the same time, for them to go up there and play All Things Must Pass, like, it would,
or something. Imagine they went up there and tried to play something. Or
even I Me Mine. Even I Me Mine would have been good the way they redid it. But at the time, they didn't have that song as a rocker yet, you know? So, like, yeah, Jake, what do you make of that?
Yeah, like, it makes sense. I think it kind of goes with the theme that they wanted to play more conventional rock songs on the roof, not obviously, I Me Mine or something, or, you know, Old Brown Shoe or something like that. That probably wouldn't have worked.
Right. And I think, you know how they say right before they go on the roof, they have like that meeting on the 4th floor before they go up. Yeah, I think that's part of the meeting. Like, I think that's like George, like, we're not doing any of my fucking songs. And, you know, like, I think that was said, you know, like
maybe he just didn't want to sing on the roof.
Yeah. But like Old Brown Shoe, that couldn't have worked.
They would have needed a grand piano though up there. That's the problem.
Yeah, like they could have done For You Blue, and they could have, like, you know, but they didn't have I Me Mine done yet, so they couldn't really do that one. You know, so, and I can't even think of another one they could have done of his other than something. All Things Must Pass. But they're not going to do that. It's kind of too slow of a song. Like, it wouldn't even be loud. Like, people would be like, "What's going on?" You know, like, it makes sense why they picked all the songs they picked, but they, you know, at the same time, I think they should have. There was a few songs that they rehearsed in the.
But they had the organ out there for Billy Preston, right?
Right, the electric piano,
electric piano. Like, they couldn't have done Let It Be up there.
No, see, like, I don't think, because, like, just because
Let It Be has the organ and the piano too, right? Like, it's kind of got that juxtaposition.
Yeah, so or Long and Winding Road, like, they're not like electric piano songs. Like, you know, yes, they have that on there, but like they're grand piano songs, you know. So like they could have done some old songs, like, or even White Album songs. You know, they could have done Helter Skelter. You know,
they could have done like While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Yeah, they could have done. They could have done that, and, like, you know. But they, you know, they didn't. But
they did not.
They played a few songs more than once. What did you guys make of the whole police in this episode? Like, you know, you could tell. I felt like Josh and Jake, as you know, what did you guys make of, like, kind of how they dealt with this? Because it felt like to me that they didn't want, like, they were pissed off because they got 30 complaints within minutes, but they didn't really want to, like, be the guys to go break up the Beatles.
I thought the one guy did. I thought the main first guy who was always chewing on his little thing, I thought he did.
He was a bit of a hardo.
Yeah, I think that sergeant that showed up at the end, he was kind of, that guy on the left. He wanted to break them up. He must have got, like, bullied by someone who liked the Beatles when he was younger. And then the sergeant shows up later, and he's all, like, happy and cheery. He's like, "Oh, they're on the roof." He just wants to go up there and watch. He wants to watch the Beatles, but by the time he gets up there, they've already, like, agreed to shut down.
And they're like, "Yeah, you can't go out there because it will collapse or something." Like, the way to
definitely not stopping the concert now.
I love the when once the police get up on the roof and Paul turns and he sees him, he turns back and he's the biggest grin on his face.
Oh yeah, he
Like the
loved
police showed up. Yeah.
Well, because that's a throwback to the first episode of this documentary, right? As Paul kind of said, it'd be cool if we did it somewhere where we're not allowed and the police had to shut us down. Like that would be kind of
drag them away.
Cool protest concert.
Yeah, it's real rock and roll, like I see, like get that, get them off on their toes. Their backs against the wall. They keep making these phrases throughout the 3-part documentary of like, we want to do something bad, basically.
Yeah, and it's same going back to where their last couple albums. It's almost like they got too comfortable in their kind of studio cushy life. Like they just kind of do something to shake the band kind of back where they need to go.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think a lot of the sentiments were all like in the right place and a good idea. And I think, Paul has the right idea, but in some ways with the wrong personnel, where I think, what's going on with John, his personal life, and George with his religious, life and everything, that I think where the whole Beatlemania of it all wasn't that long ago. And I think they're just like over it. Like, not Paul and not Ringo. But the other two are kind of like,
1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah.
Right. George seems like he's ready to, like, he quits the band in the part at the end of part 1. A couple of meetings at Ringo's house later, he's willing to kind of do it, at least finish this. And I guess they got, how many months later was Abbey Road? Like,
no, they literally in February they recorded that. So
that was like only a month later.
Yeah. Where they, I think February 2020 to like somewhere in March. Like it was like a 4 or 5 week period that they
probably when Ringo was done the movie. Like I said earlier, it's almost like it would have been nice if they had just made like one big album, because I feel like by the time Let It Be comes out later, everyone's kind of disappointed in it, because it's like almost like the leftover songs from Abbey Road plus the ones they did on the Rooftop, so they can't put them in Abbey Road. You know what I mean? Like it would have been nice if they made it like a big album, like the White Album, and just had one nice album.
It would have been cool if they had done like Abbey Road as one of like the sides of the double album and Savile Row is the other side of the double album, like that would have been cool. And then like, so you get like this very studio polished songs, and you get like the more rocker live stuff, like that would have been a cool idea for them to have done. But then the thing is, and I kind of want to talk about this, is, they have the meeting here with Allen Klein, Dave.
Yes.
And, they don't really, they don't show us the meeting, but they do show us them talking about how the meeting went. Okay.
It's like George and John talking, right?
Yeah. With, I believe, John Glynns. And I think it's very important, as far as like Beatle historians and people who understand what happened to this band, was this Allen Klein guy came in, for an American guy who'd always wanted to manage the Beatles, and the Beatles were kind of looking for a manager because they'd been managing themselves for 2 years. And they even admit in this episode that he's like a con man. They know he's a con man. They know he's a shyster, but he's like, oh, he's going to be on our side, because everyone that they've dealt with from EMI have always basically given them the worst deal. Like, basically EMI would take like, 90%. I don't know the number, but like a majority of the money from their recordings, and like that's what they had signed when they first became famous, and they didn't know better. They and so now when they started Apple, they wanted to hold control it, but the thing is they needed studios, they needed all these different things, so it's very interesting, the dynamic. What did you make of that whole conversation about Allen Klein, Dave?
Well, I didn't know much about the history of it. Like I knew the name Allen Klein, and like, so this like, because I got my notes here. Okay, yeah, like, so George is teaching the song Something, and it seems like John and Paul are helping him, and then all of a sudden they're talking about Allen Klein, and then royalties, the Rolling Stones are coming up a bit, and I was just kind of like, and then Biafra was being talked about for some reason, and like in some kind of charity work. Anyway, so I was kind of lost through most of it. Like, just like, even though I kind of know the story, I was just like, what are they talking about? And did they miss the mark in this documentary series? Because like this is Peter Jackson's chance to say something different than the original Let It Be documentary did in 1970, which was like basically this is why the Beatles broke up, because they were egomaniacs and they couldn't get out of each other's way. And I think that's kind of true. And they were so miserable playing together again that they had to break up. But they were kind of they weren't even as miserable as they think they were. Because I think the edit of that 1970 documentary put them in the headspace that like that sucked and I didn't like being with those guys, and that documentary kind of like created that mindset for them for years, right? You know, but this documentary really could have done more to talk about. It was really the business aspects that broke them up. The fact that Allen like Epstein died. That was his name, right? Epstein.
Yeah, Brian Epstein. Yeah,
you know, Brian Epstein. He died, and then they managed themselves, and then this guy, Allen Klein, who they know is kind of like a Colonel Parker, kind of like a shifty manager type, is involved. And then and like later it's Paul wants to bring in his father-in-law, basically, right?
Yeah, Linda's father. Yeah, who was like a high up lawyer in New York, and basically said we could trust. Look, lads, we can trust him. You know, whereas he didn't trust this Allen Klein, which, you know, rightfully so.
Well, maybe they needed a third option is really what the truth of it. Like, because I get why the other Beatles wouldn't want somebody so close to Paul to be like the manager either, right? So it's like, but was they couldn't find somebody else in all this? There's only corrupt music managers, Jeff?
Well, that's what I was kind of getting to, and maybe Josh, can you speak a little bit to this? That, like, you know, it seems like the music industry is like this corrupt cabal, and it's hard to find anybody that's like, you know, genuinely going to look out for them. That's kind of how the Beatles seems like they were describing it, and that's why they ended up deciding to manage themselves and start Apple and do all that whole direction. But they got to a point where it's like it's getting too big and it's getting too much for us to be a rock group and run Apple, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the music industry has been pretty exposed in recent years about how, you know, the record labels and the producers kind of take advantage of the talent. They get them when they're not famous. They make them sign these crazy deals. If you sign 100 nobodies to these deals and one of them takes off and you're getting 90% of their earnings, you know, they're stuck there, right? Like, we look at what happened with like Britney Spears. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of crazy stuff. And I think the Beatles have realized that. They realized that they kind of went through their most, you know, prolific phase. They probably could have made a lot more money, and now they're trying to protect themselves. And as, you know, we know with Klein, it ended up ultimately being what made McCartney say he was leaving the band, was he didn't want to be with this guy who was, you know, a predatory, not that this is the reason he did it, but kind of a predatory manager. He wanted to be with someone they could trust, and they might not get them the best deal, but it would get them the best deal as the Beatles, not the manager. So I don't know. I don't know a lot about the breakup, but it was interesting that when Paul didn't seem to be in the room, John started bringing up the Allen Klein stuff. You know, it was interesting.
Yeah, Jake, like, is that what you kind of like gathered from it too? It seemed like John was the one that was like, all right, we're gonna get this Allen Klein in, and he's gonna be our muscle to go against the music industry for us. And Paul wouldn't go for that, so we're not gonna, like, you know, like he knows about it, but he's not gonna be privy to every like aspect of the direction that we want to go here.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think he was first talking to just George about it and saying, like, talking about Allen Klein. He's like, yeah, I was going to bring it up when it's all of us together, but they've been together a lot and he hasn't said anything. And then, then later on when they're having the meeting and John's like, oh, like, yeah, Allen Klein's here. We're going to go up and talk to him. And you can just kind of see Paul's face. He's just kind of like a whatever, like completely disinterested kind of face, whereas John seems to be really, really kind of enamored with him, saying how great he is and how smart he is, and he has all these great ideas and all this great stuff he's going to do. So I think
and not to interrupt, but like even John Glynn says, like, look, he's like, he'll cut you off halfway through your sentence and be like, what are you doing? And like, you know, he's like I don't like that, you know. He's like, he's supposed to be representing you, and he's kind of like bullying you guys, and and John's like, yeah, but we're used to dealing with bullies, and they're always against us. At least this guy's with us. Is basically what he said.
Mhm.
Which I think John Glintz is like, all right,
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
And for anyone who doesn't know, like basically what happened is after the Beatles broke up, McCartney was like, I'm not working with this guy, but he had a contract with the Beatles. So
Yes.
Klein was the manager of Lennon, Harrison, and Ringo solo. And within like 3 years of that, Harrison like tried to fire him. Lennon was quoted as saying, oh, I think Paul was right about this guy. And Klein ended up suing the Beatles and suing Apple. And there was this huge legal dispute. And watching the documentary and seeing, firsthand evidence that this guy had basically duped at least John and George. They didn't really show Ringo's thoughts on him. It kind of shows like, okay, Paul's he's kind of boring and he's making them work on his songs too much, but maybe he read this guy correctly.
Well, from what I understand, that so basically what happened was the Beatles had a vote about Allen Klein, and it was originally like Paul and Ringo were on the kind of the same side, and George and John basically kind of like convinced Ringo to vote for Allen, and that's when the Beatles broke up. Like that was like when it happened. So then Paul sued the Beatles. He left the Beatles and then sued them. And so because he wanted his rights back, basically, which I believe he ended up getting, but it took a while. But you're right. And then he went on to manage John and George and Ringo's solo careers, and that did not end well either. So yeah, you're right that John eventually was like, oh, he was right about him, and so this whole thing with Allen Klein is like unnecessary, didn't need to happen. Once again, kind of like this whole doing this in 5 weeks, they didn't need to do it this way. Right. Dave, like, what do you kind of like? Do you think like I feel like they put themselves in impossible situations a lot? Yeah,
well, like it's like they definitely bit off more than they can chew, right? Like, and more than some of them want to chew, because George just wants to make studio albums, and Paul has these great lofty ambitions, and he wants to make music videos and movies and different things, and he wants to expand in different ways. And John I think just wants to make good songs. But
no, I feel like John wants to like stick it to the man. He wants to like get back at the music industry. He wants to like he's a revolutionary. He's like an anarchist. He's like burn it, like like I feel like that's kind of the way he looks at it. Like he's like we're gonna get what's ours, because I think they were kind of screwed over in their original deal,
right. But like John, I don't get John sometimes. Like this whole like he's a great guy and he's also this asshole, like, and like I don't know what I don't know exactly what went on with Allen Klein throughout his life, but when Allen Klein died in 2009, Jeff, this is something interesting. Like Yoko Ono and Sean Lennon, they both went to the funeral, so they were still on good terms with him in 2009.
Interesting. I mean, if you go to somebody's funeral, I guess you're on somewhat good terms. Doesn't mean you agree with them everything business-wise, though, I guess, right?
Yeah, but like this is like a long time after anything John Lennon and Allen Klein. And it makes me wonder how much was Yoko Ono pushing for Allen Klein for whatever reason. And,
don't quote me on this, but I think this is like really long ago knowledge, and it's just because of what you said, but I feel like Yoko might have had like a thing with where Klein after the fact, after John was dead, kind of helped her push back against the other Beatles a bit. So maybe there was a reconciliation there, but that's complete hearsay. Like this is something I maybe read years ago.
I could see that. Like maybe he helped her like basically cover John's assets or something like that. And,
something like that.
Put it in like, because, the other thing is like when I was just looking earlier, but like John legally changed his name as well to like John Winston Ono Lennon. And like maybe that was a legal thing. I don't know how all that works. You'd know better than me, Josh. But I do think that like they were married. And like I do think that there is some like, the other Beatles definitely could have had, 3-1 vote, or I don't know how their contracts worked, but it definitely some arguments definitely took place once John died. I think as far as what they could do, with their songwriting, their royalties, all that kind of stuff. Dave, go to Jake. Sorry. With the Rooftop concert, what did you make of like them, like the kind of like the snapshot of time I kind of took from like here in January of 1969. They're asking like, hey, do you know the music they're playing? Like, do you know, like, what's going on? Some of them are like, yeah, it's the Beatles, ain't it? And then others like, no, I have no idea what's going on. And they're like, I guess it's not just this, like, I felt like they didn't really care as much that it's the, like we would today, obviously, but like even back then, like they're like, yeah, it's cool, but like, whatever, it's the Beatles,
Yeah, I think a lot of it was like some people would know that that's where the Beatles studio is and that they are making an album there right now. Not necessarily that, they're actually on the, like, they may not even know that they're on the rooftop playing. They might think, oh, they're practicing and there's a window open so we can hear everything. Like maybe it wasn't quite the shock value that we would think if they knew, oh, they're actually on the rooftop and they're playing like a concert, I guess you could call it.
Yeah.
It seemed like a few people referenced like, oh, like I thought those studios were soundproofed, or like, what's going on, where's the music coming from? So I think it was more almost confusion than it was actually people like realizing what was going on.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of that, and it's also like I enjoyed seeing like some of the, just like the people of the time kind of just reacting to it. It's the type, especially in HD, like for me it was just so cool to see that.
Well, like the old battle axe being like, oh, they woke me up for my nap.
She had my nap.
She was like a Monty Python character.
Yeah.
And I'm not happy about it. I know, yeah, that was the best.
Like all I could think throughout that whole thing was like, this is like the Beatles' last concert, and like I'm always like amazed by like 30 complaints is more important than maybe the count. Like maybe there's a lot of people not complaining too, and maybe that this isn't such a inconvenience or such a crime is really being committed here. They played a couple songs for like not even an hour in the middle of the day.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh. Legally, like, are they disrupting the peace here? Is this you let it go if you're the police? Do you have to shut it down? Like, what's going on?
Like, I would say 100% they were disrupting the peace, but at the same time, it's the Beatles. Like, it's whatever. But I think it was really interesting watching that, and when they're talking about the 30 complaints, and 90% of people are having fun, and there's a few people complaining. It's like a social experiment. It's like literally what we deal with every day. Like, not any issue in particular, but there's always going to be the vocal minority pissed off about something. They don't care how many people are made happy. It's ruining their day. They're going to complain. And the law is sort of, if it upsets one person, we need to stop it, even if it makes everyone else happy. And I thought that was really cool to see. And I don't know if Peter Jackson was doing that on purpose by kind of highlighting this. Cop kept saying, oh, we've had 30 complaints. We have 30 complaints. Meanwhile, you've got people from the ages of 15 to 75 out on the street saying they're having a great time and they love this. So I thought it was really cool to see, some things never change, basically.
Yeah, no, for sure. And okay, the other thing I want to say about the Rooftop concert is like, okay, I was doing my flyers earlier, and I was watching the Grey Cup halftime show. Okay, the sound was terrible. Like for me, like I was just watching it on my phone, but if I watched the Rooftop concert, it would be way, 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 way better. Why? Like, why this is like 50 years ago. Like, what happened? Like, I mean, I know this is about the Grey Cup. I don't know if you guys all watched that halftime show, but like, I did not enjoy. I'm a huge Arkells fan. I did not think it was very good. Maybe Jake, did you watch it?
Yeah, I think it's almost because it was simpler. Like, there's probably for the Grey Cup, there's probably way more like mics, way more channels, that everything's kind of gets muddled. Whereas the Beatles one, it was like analog versus digital. You know what I mean? Like it was truer. It was a much truer sound.
Yeah, like Josh, did you watch that Grey Cup thing or whatever? Like it was.
Yeah, I was watching it with Jake, and I think it's part of it's just production value. Like, I don't know if it's what's going on in Hamilton, but I feel like the Super Bowl, they do a great job is when you're watching the halftime show, you can like turn up the bass and it sounds like you're listening to an album. Whereas like that Arkell's halftime show yesterday, it sounded like I was listening to it on the speakers in like a 91 Cutlass or something. It wasn't good.
It was not good. It was really bad.
It's a deep Cutlass,
and it was just not well sound mixed. They needed John Glynns. They needed a sound engineer.
Well, yeah, they had all that talent there, like in one little studio, plus all the equipment they could just bring up, and
they had Alan Parsons.
I haven't seen this Arkell's halftime show because I'm also an Arkell's fan, and I was curious to see how they would sound, but maybe they just hired a bad sound design group or something.
I don't know. It was I had a whole bunch of problems with that halftime show.
I think it's all like the wireless mics, and they have mics on probably 50 different people, and I don't know. I think it just makes everything all kind of muddy and mashed together. Like, it just doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I think when you're bringing up different bands to play with you, and then you got this whole other person coming up with you, and then it's like you got all these horns and you got all these people jumping around on the stage. It's just like, you're right, Jake. Like, simpler. Just do the analog versus digital. I'll take the analog. All day. I'll take the vinyl over the CD any day. And that's kind of what makes me, I think, why the Beatles are so timeless, why I love them so much. It's just like they, take me back to the roots of music.
Get back.
Okay. Dave,
I got a couple questions.
Yeah, you got a couple questions? Hit me.
George Harrison, for the guy who didn't want to play on the roof, and kind of was fighting it. He was the guy who defiantly turns the amp back on when the cops make this dude, this road manager guy, turn it off. Right? Mao. I was like, why did they need a road manager? Consider they never go on the road. But it's this guy who played the hammer in like part 1 or whatever for Maxwell's Silver Hammer.
Okay. So just two things quick. Yeah, George, I don't think he's like, if we're going to do it, I'm going to go all the way, and I don't care. And he did, I don't think he was too interested in, helping out the police or anything like that. Kind of like, I think John would have done the same thing. I think they all were happy to do it. They're like, we're famous, we're rich, nothing's really going to happen to us.
Maybe it was just George. This is a little, speculation. Maybe he was just pissed off they turned off his amp. They're like, why did they turn off my amp? Because I'm George Harrison. Why didn't they turn off Paul's?
Yeah, they're always picking on me, George, the least appreciated Beatle of them all.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not the quiet Beatle tonight. Turns it up. Okay, guys, do you know anything about like what happened to Mal Evans? Do you guys, the roadie, like, do any of you guys know the story about how he died?
He died. Oh, he's dead.
He died. Yeah, in the 70s. Okay, so. All right, crazy story. Okay, so I believe it's 1976 or 77. He was in LA, and he was he was writing this book called Living the Beatles Legend or something like that, and he was going to release like all this all this background of like the Beatles, who they were, what they were like, and he knew them better than anybody, right? And so he was in a hotel, I believe, in LA with this guy, and they got into an argument, and there was like a call of the police. That's why it made me think about it again, because the police came, the LAPD, to this hotel room, and then he like got onto the balcony with it was an airsoft rifle, and he was like holding it up, and he was like, and then the police gunned him down. That's how Mal Evans died.
Where was this? What city?
In LA.
Because he's from England, he doesn't think he's going to get shot by the police because he's from England.
Probably.
And then he goes to LA with an airsoft gun. Obviously, you're going to get shot.
Yeah, like a fascinating story. I mean, like, what happened to him? But like, here, I'll read you real quick what happened to him. On January 5th, 1976. So 7 years after this. Right. Evans was so despondent that Hughes phoned a guy named John Horning, Evans' co-writer for his biography. Yeah, that was what he was writing. And he said he went to visit him and saw Evans that he was really doped up and groggy. But Evans told Horney to make sure he finished the book. he helped Evans upstairs to his bedroom, but during an incoherent conversation, Evans picked up an air rifle. Herney struggled with Evans, but Evans was much stronger and held on to the weapon. Hughes then phoned the police and told them that Evans was confused, had a rifle, and was on Valium. 4 police officers arrived, and 3 of them went up to the bedroom. They later reported that as soon as Evans saw the 3 police officers, he pointed the rifle at them. The officers immediately told Evans to put the weapon down, but he refused. And then the police fired 6 shots, 4 hitting Evans and killing him.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, Jeff, I already know you believe that the Beatles drugged him up, gave him an air rifle, and then called the cops so they could kill him to stop the book from coming out, because that sounds like your kind of conspiracy theory.
No. I would never go that far. The actual conspiracy theory about this is that he, it goes down into the whole Paul is dead thing, that he had, stuff with the Paul being replaced, and he was going to release it, and whatever. Yeah. So that's the whole like why he was killed. But I don't believe any of that. I just think he was probably drugged up and, had a bad day. And you're right. Like I think he was in LA and not in England, and probably didn't expect to get murdered by the police. So there's that.
Yes, when he died that George Harrison arranged for his family to receive £5,000 as he had not maintained any life insurance or any kind of pensions or anything like that. And
it was 5,000 a lot back then or something.
£5,000. Well, none of them went to the funeral either, so they didn't care that much for him, Jeff.
That's what I find so odd about this whole story, because he was like their roadie for like 12 years, like since the 50s. Like he was around them, for a long time. And was like, they all like talked about this. He was like their good buddy, and like they went everywhere with them. He was kind of like their muscle. And so, for them to like, there's no mention of it. The Beatles never talk about it. They never really bring him up and go, we miss Mal. Like, I don't know.
His ashes were lost in the postal system, Jeff.
Wow.
While being returned. And then John Lennon joked saying they should look in the dead letter file.
Yeah, dark stuff. Right? So go ahead, Josh.
Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr, if you're watching this, we want to know what you think about Mal. This needs to be addressed.
We know you're watching right now. You're probably coming in on the Twitch stream.
Right. You're one of those 4. 2 of the 4, Ringo and Paul. But I want to know what happened to him and why they never talk about him, and like what
I know we're coming to the end of our hour, but I had this other one question I didn't get to.
Yep.
That we kind of skipped over. But there's this one part where like John and Paul are playing this song together with like their teeth clenched for the whole song.
Yeah.
What the hell was this?
I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yelena was my wife. She was like, I'm going to have nightmares tonight. She couldn't even look at John on the screen. She was like this. She was like, what is wrong with him? He looks like a demon.
Yeah, he really like clenched his face up really like crazy, and like I mean, I think they were just having fun, but like I was impressed. Like again, I said this last episode, but like with Paul's voices, and I try doing that. Try talking on there. It's not that easy.
It's like, who asked them to do this? I don't get it.
No. I actually think that them doing that, because they have to harmonize their voices for the song. I think them doing that was almost like an exercise to kind of get their pitch on the same level and their tone, just to like help them harmonize. Like obviously it's for fun, but I think it was just like a way to kind of loosen them up and to get them kind of going on the same level.
I think like you notice like throughout the episode, John does that a lot, where he kind of like has fun with his words and kind of like does it in a funny voice, and then Paul kind of like feeds off that, and then they kind of like get it. You're right, Jake. Get into that harmony together.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. We burst out laughing during the credits when Paul's doing "Let It Be" for like the 50th time, and John's like mouthing it the whole time. He's like. And then the words pop up, and it's like this version was used on the album. Let It Be. Meanwhile, John's just making fun of it the whole time.
I love too when he starts "Let It Be" and then he screws up and he goes, and then it's just like John's just like, what the shit was that? And they start doing that German accent stuff. It's really funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess it was like the final take, right? He goes, "I think that was rather grand. I'd take one home." And he goes, "We've done so many of that bastard. That's got to be good enough, right?"
Yeah.
He's just like, it was funny.
Yeah.
But then I was like, you guys didn't like clearly just playing together for the most, at least for John and Paul, like they should have kept going, right? I think as those two, maybe not George. I think George was meant to go off, and Ringo was just kind of like a tag on, So, like,
I mean, it is sad. I agree with Dave that they're the two best songwriters as a team, but
ever,
and
probably
Lieber and Stoller, and it's like those two guys,
and they probably would have, if John had died in 1980, because like there was decades to come, and it's very possible that they would have, for the anthology or whatever, it would have gone back together. John even said in some interviews, like, yeah, Beatles will eventually come back together in some form, I think. But
there was a Paul quote in one of the episodes where he said that. He's like, 20 years we'll all get back together and we'll play and we'll think this is silly that we did this.
Right.
Yeah, and I think one of the sad things about John's death is that they were supposed to meet each other like only a week or two after he got assassinated to talk about doing, I believe, a Saturday Night Live performance. There was conversations about that the Beatles were going to come back and do SNL. So, yeah. So that's the sad stuff about.
That was when SNL really sucked too. Like that would have been a big get for them at that time.
Well, George Harrison had already done SNL with Paul Simon.
That was like Joe Piscopo days, 1981 or whatever. So it's
SNL's always sucked, but it's
that's before Eddie Murphy was even there. Come on,
right. but it's sucked and it's great at the same time, But yeah, and John was already in New York, and Ringo will show up if his name gets, if he's involved.
Ringo will show up and pay him.
Yeah, Ringo will be there. If Ringo will play Casino Niagara, he was gonna
Casino Rama.
Yeah.
Not even Niagara. Yeah, Rama up in Barrie.
Rama
up in Barrie. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the thing. Okay, I think we're getting toward the end here, guys. If there's anything you guys want to bring up that we have not brought up, feel free to do so now. Forever hold a peace on Get Back Here.
I think it's nice that they. I think Peter Jackson could have made this shorter. I'm gonna go on the record. I think like of these 6 hours, I think maybe at least one more hour could have been cut out of this, just kind of boring, redundant stuff.
I think a half hour of each the first two episodes could have been cut.
I agree, though. I would say we taught this guy that if you make one movie 30 minutes longer than it needs to be, you're going to win like 11 Oscars for that movie. So maybe he's doing that now. Yeah. And then this is my little sort of takeaway. You can say the rest of yours after, Dave. I only have this one. Did anyone else get trained by the end of this that whenever the little words popped up on the screen, like, this was used on the album or whatever, you got like excited? Did anyone else feel like that?
Yeah.
Like that. It was weird. I became self-aware of that by the third episode. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Why do I care so much when Peter Jackson like texts me on the screen during the footage? Like, oh, this was the take they used. I was getting like kind of excited by that. And I thought that was weird. That was the biggest takeaway I had from this entire trilogy.
I already knew that it was the take they used, and I still got excited.
Yeah, he's training us. It's like because we must have watched too much pop-up video when we were younger or something.
This must have been Jake. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Dave. No.
There's just so much rehearsal of especially certain songs in this, right? Like Get Back in particular, and Don't Let Me Down. And you're like, really? Like all those takes weren't good enough? Like this was the final good one that you used? Okay, sure. It sounds about the same as it did every other time you played it.
I think it came down to, Dave, like they spent 4 years like redoing all this footage and making it HD, and he's like, I'm not leaving this on the cutting room floor. I think that was basically what it came down to, like it's like to him it would have been a shame.
But it's if it's for like just the Beatles super fans, great. But I think to like bring in like a new generation into the Beatles, I think that this wouldn't serve that purpose.
Yeah.
Well, originally it was supposed to be a movie, right? Before COVID. So it'd be kind of cool if they released the like condensed version, like the original like 2.5 hour movie that was supposed to go into theaters. And that was like an alternative viewing experience. Also, I read somewhere a couple of weeks ago they might be releasing a remastered version of the original Let It Be movie on Disney Plus. So that would be kind of cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. One other thing I wanted to mention was I'm so glad that there was no like modern day like interview, or there was nothing. It was just the 60s stuff. Like it was just a pure documentary like style. Like there was no like, hey, Paul's like explaining, oh, this is when we did this, and no, I'm glad.
I was really mad at George this day, or whatever they would throw in. You know, no. It's just you don't really need it because he did do this 6-hour version. Like, you know, sure, there's things we might not see, and like there might be more context taken out. But I think for the most part, you get a real sense that like by the end of it, I was like, Paul's exactly what I thought he was. John is this kind of mixed bag person. George is whiny and moody and super talented. Yeah. And then and Ringo's asleep
and farting.
And farting. He sounds like my kind of guy.
That was the other best part when, like, you know, the long and winding road, and like, and Paul's playing it, and he's like, I guess not much drumming for you, Ringo. And he just looks at Ringo's asleep. You know, he's like, all right, yeah, you would have played drums for this song, long and winding road.
Which is funny because the drums in that song and the final product are like amazing, right? So,
yeah. Yeah, they redid a few of these songs like a year later in, I believe, January 1970, and kind of overdubbed some of the vocals. And so even though some of the things, like he said, like, oh, this is the take they used, yes, that's true. But then they did go back and do things once again. Yeah. Jake, any last takeaways here for the Beatles Get Back?
Yeah, like I said, like the way that I watched, I basically watched the whole thing in like 48 hours. So it was a lot of information at once. Yeah, I really like the way that Peter Jackson did it. Similar to like a World War I documentary, the They Shall Not Grow Old. It was all every footage, every voice, it was all original from the time. And this is definitely something that, you know, you kind of let it breathe for a bit, and then maybe a couple months, a year down the line, you rewatch it again, and you'll probably pick up on a bunch of stuff that you didn't even notice the first time watching it.
Yeah, though, like I agree, and I think that's kind of like, even though it is too long, as a Beatles fan, like I understand why Peter Jackson made it so long, because exactly what Jake just said, you can go back and rewatch it and check it out. You can skip certain parts, like anytime Yoko's singing, that's a skip, you know. But you know, there's lots of cool stuff where you can kind of just like really be a fly on the wall here and just check out one of the coolest bands of all time for sure. Okay. All right. I think we've come to the end here, guys, of the Beatles Get Back Part 3. Thank you all for joining us. We've had a pleasure talking about this band and this documentary that Peter Jackson put out here on Disney Plus. But we do have lots of other great things here on Super Mario Bros. Podcasting. Dave, can you run down some of the things that we have? We have Survivor. That's coming up on
Survivor
Wednesday.
Finale. Survivor Season 41 is finishing up this Wednesday, December 15th. We are anticipating a 2-hour finale. So we're expecting to go on about 10:30 p.m. this Wednesday night. Jameel Robinson joined with Jeff and I as we've covered all season, all 13, 14 episodes so far. What are we down to? Final 5, right? Final 6?
Final 5.
Final 5. We are down.
Final 5 in our 6-person pool. We have 5 of us that all have 1 person left, so it's kind of cool in our Survivor pool.
Oh, nice.
Yes. In our Survivor pool, it's basically between Daryl and Jeff. They're the only 2 who could possibly win this. Well, unless Heather comes out of nowhere and gets Jameel to win. But it's looking like. But Daryl, like he drafted Danny, but then like he got like the bottom of the snake, and then he got like Ricard, and he got, who was the other one he got?
Another guy.
It doesn't matter that much. I think Heather kind of has a winner edit, so she could win.
Xander. Sorry.
Yeah, Xander. I have Deshaun and Erica. Go ahead, Josh.
I have Deshaun.
He's not winning.
I don't know. Like I feel like he has the second best chance to Ricard. I think Ricard's winning, guys, but we'll, you know.
I have Ricard.
Yeah, I think you're going to be the winner on Wednesday. But yeah, tune in for that because it might not happen because
It won't be Shan. It won't be Nasir. I will not be winning this year. So it
No.
will. Yeah. So check out that, and then also this Saturday we're going to be talking about the newest Marvel Cinematic Universe installment, Spider-Man: No Way Home. Planning to do a podcast sometime on Saturday to talk about that new movie. So check that out. We did Eternals not too long ago. We'll be looking at Hawkeye in a few weeks when that series on Disney Plus wraps. And I think that's all the Super Mater Brothers podcasting stuff. Plus, we have Live Long in Podcast, a Star Trek themed channel where we talk about different Star Trek properties. We have just tonight we did the Enterprise theme, the Enterprise podcast. That's right. So that started with Jody Simpson last week, and Adam Woodward and Kevin Millards. We just talked about the third episode, which is kind of like the second episode of Star Trek Enterprise, Fight or Flight. And we'll be talking about every episode of Star Trek Enterprise in order, continuing on from here. So if you've never watched Enterprise, or even if you have, it's there for you. Plus Deep Space Nine, very similar. We've been watching every episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Jeff Mader, the station commander, on Tuesday nights. We'll be talking about tomorrow, Jeff, For the Cause. Michael Eddington, his lucky loony. He's betraying them for the Maquis. He betrayed his uniform. You're gonna see it all.
Can't wait.
Yeah, and then Thursday we'll be talking about the newest installment of Star Trek Discovery, the 5th episode of season 4, still untitled, not announced yet, but we'll be talking about that. Plus, we've talked about Star Trek Prodigy and Star Trek Lower Decks in terms of the new Star Trek shows this year. And this Sunday night we'll be doing our next installment of Star Trek Radio Theater as we do script reads of old Star Trek, shows and movies. This will be our season 2 finale as we're doing Star Trek First Contact. I'll be playing Captain Picard. Jeff will be playing Geordi LaForge. And others. So check that out live or the edited version, which will come out a few weeks later. And also, Jeff, did you know we also have a show called Trivial Debates,
Yes.
a monthly show where we argue about movies, TV, sports, and more. We have Max Duda set to host the next installment on December 27th with Eamon Mader and Adam Woodward competing, and a yet to be determined contestant. So
Very nice.
Check all that out on our different channels and content.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for that rundown. Josh, Jake, you have anything you want to plug?
If you need a lawyer, give me a call. That's about all I can say.
Jake? No?
Call Josh if you need a lawyer.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks, guys. So for all of us here at Super Mater Bros Podcasting, Jeff Mader, Dave Mader, Josh, Jake Shields, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Super Mater Bros Podcasting. Good night.
I think that was rather grand, Jeff. I take one home.
I hope we passed the